This is Prince Robert. Prince Robert was one of a trio of these little pocket liners that was built for the Canadian National Railway in the early 30s. They were built in the UK, and the idea was that they were going to be offer a service, an alternate to the Canadian Pacific service on the Pacific coast. Now, CN had an earlier generation of ships represented by Prince George here, but they built these ships, and of course, timing is everything, and shipping as in everything else. They arrived just as the Depression was killing trade and killing interest in passenger service and so on. So they were never really commercial successes. One of them, and they were the Prince Robert, the Prince Henry, and the Prince David. And I think the names were the names of three of the senior directors. So Henry so and so said, okay, I'll have one of those named for me. One of them ran down to the West Indies from Montreal in the late 30s. One of them was laid up. One sort of maintained sort of a sketchy service out here. Now, when war came, they were converted to armed merchant cruisers, and that was kind of interesting. That the chief of the Canadian Naval Staff, Percy Nellies, had identified these ships in the 30s as being suitable for conversion. Converting a merchant ship sounded like a bit of a wild idea, but in the 30s it was thought that German surface raiders would be a big threat, and so the Allies would need ships to protect merchant ships, and so these three were taken in hand. One of them was converted over in Burrard, one in Montreal. I can't remember whether there were two converted out here or not. In any event, the superstructures were cut down and guns were put on. We don't have a picture here, but they ended up looking quite presentable as small warships, and they were significant for the Royal Canadian Navy because until 1944 they were our largest warships, and they performed a variety of functions. By 1943, it was obvious they were no longer useful as armed merchant cruisers, so they were converted. Two of them one became an anti-aircraft cruiser, and two became landing ships. So they then carried a number of landing craft, and they were involved in operations in the Mediterranean and in the landings off the south coast of France. After the war, they were sold, and I think one became a commercial liner. But it's an interesting story of how commercially they were a failure, but they had utility in war.